If there's anyone in the hallway that can hear us, or any board members, if you can come on back so we can continue on with the meeting. Just want to ensure that we have a quorum from the board so that we can move on. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think we have one now. Yeah, we have 11. And we have one more coming in. So if we could, those of you in the hallways, especially board members, if you could return. Okay, we're good. Thank you, and board members. I just want to try to keep the meeting moving along because I know there's members of the public that want to speak. The next item on the agenda is the discussion of the RIPA Board's annual report contents, and Ms. Hovis is going to give us a brief overview of that.
First, I just wanted to direct everybody to a one-page sheet that was out on the table outside. If you don't have one, check out there. There should be some still. It has on one side of it, and board members, you have these in your folders. So this is just taken directly from the statute. So this outlines the side that says annual report of the Racial and Identity Profiling Advisory Board, outlines as specified in the statute. I have an extra here if somebody wants it. What the board is responsible for doing in each of its annual reports. So the annual report is due every January. So our first report for this board is going to be due January of 2018. So we have about 6 months. Each year on an annual basis, the board is required to analyze both the stop data that will be collected, analyze the citizen complaint data alleging racial or identity profiling, which is also part of AB 953. Analyze the law enforcement training under this section. That refers to the post-training around racial profiling. So in addition to just updating that training to reflect that racial profiling, the prohibition on racial profiling is no longer just a prohibition on racial profiling, it's also against a prohibition on identity profiling. So updating that, but we can make a variety of recommendations in that regard. We are responsible for working in partnership with state and local law enforcement agencies to review and analyze their local policies and practices, and then conducting evidence-based research on intentional and implicit biases and so forth, law enforcement stop, search tactics, and et cetera. So each report has to include the data, the stop data and the citizen complaint data alleging profiling disaggregated by agency. And what we've started to do, if you'll flip to the other side of this, and we won't get into detail about this now, but we're suggesting the creation of 5 different subcommittees. If folks think that these should be slightly different, or we need others or additions, then that's also up for consideration, and we can discuss that after public comment. But essentially, these subcommittees that we're contemplating would follow the requirements outlined and required of the board for their report. So I'll just say this, I've already started doing a lot of thinking about what this report might look like, sort of the interface of it, what, the structure and form, but ultimately it's your report. So as much as I'm happy to provide some guidance in that regard. I think it would be first just useful as we continue the conversation to have all of you express your thoughts on what you think this report should look like, what information or how it should convey the required information as laid out in the statute. And yeah, I'll sort of leave it at that for now, and then we can launch into a broader discussion afterward. But I think it's useful for the public, before you go into public comment, to just understand sort of the scope of what this report should do. I'll just direct everybody to subsection E of Penal Code Section 13519.4. So The report, so we're responsible for issuing a report that provides RIPA's analysis under the subparagraphs I mentioned before above, A to D, detailed findings on the past and current status of racial and identity profiling, and makes policy recommendations for eliminating racial and identity profiling. So that is really like our macro task, right, is to provide a state of what does profiling look like in California presently, what are the best practices for trainings, policies, practices, and so forth, and what concrete recommendations does this board make? So those are kind of the primary prongs in which I'm thinking of this.
Thank you, Shannon. And we're having a more detailed discussion when we talk about the subcommittees and how that will help us formulate the report. We wanted some context to those members of the public here so that they understand what the reporting requirements are. Do any other comments from the board before we move to public comment? Yes, Mr. Slark.
Thanks. I'd like to, well, I'm looking at the structure of the subcommittees in relation to the work to create the report, right? And I think it would be important to include hiring and promotions beyond just training, and maybe that's part of the sort of profiling, racial profiling policies and practices, but I also see that that subcommittee looks like it has an incredibly large purview of work to do. So I would just make that suggestion to staff that we figure out how to work that in.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, we're going to move on to public comment. There's a microphone in the back. We do have a 3-minute time minimum, and I think there is signs that will tell you how much time you have. They tried to give me that assignment, and I did not want to do that one.
And he hasn't done.
So, speakers, if you could keep your time limits to 3 minutes, and not required, but if you would like to, for context, provide your name and who you're affiliated with, you can. If you don't want to, that's fine. So go ahead, sir, you're first one.
Thank you. So my name is Khalid Alexander. In addition to being a full-time faculty member at the local San Diego City College, I'm also a part of an organization called Pillars of the Community that advocates for people who have been impacted by the criminal justice system, which is just a fancy way of saying everybody, but particularly everybody who's living in Southeast San Diego. Let me begin by kind of referring to the presentation that we heard from the gentleman from Post and the movie. It wasn't at all a surprise to me that it had received 2 Emmys because it was clearly a work of fiction. The only question for me is whether or not it was a comedy or a tragedy. The idea of racial profiling in our neighborhoods is not a funny issue which we have the opportunity to sit across or the desire to sit across from police officers and discuss. We are constantly being dismissed. The community members are constantly being dismissed when we talk about racial profiling, when we talk about other issues that affect us and impact us on a daily basis. Just the other day, we have a police task force called the Gang Suppression Unit, which is known to operate throughout the week, but particularly on Tuesdays and Thursdays, where they swerve in and out of our communities like cowboys pulling people over, similar to the events that we saw in another documentary, although this was another movie, although it was less fictional, the Rampart Division in Los Angeles. Once of these opportunities we tried to pull over and we tried to observe what's happening, and I had one of their captains come and speak to me, and when we asked them what they were doing, they said, "We're pulling over gang members." We asked, "Well, how do you know they're a gang member?" And they said, well, we're not pulling over gang members, we're pulling over people that are committing crimes. And as everybody in law enforcement or that has been interacted and had real conversations with people in law enforcement knows, if you follow anybody for more than 2 minutes, you will find a reason to pull them over. Just a few weeks ago, we all celebrated the 4th of July, and while some people were celebrating patriotism and celebrating freedom, people of color were being pulled over, people of color were being harassed, and people of color will continue to be dismissed. When we bring these issues up with our police chiefs, when we bring these issues up with our captains, they say we recognize that there's a perception of racial profiling. Our realities are not a perception, and the only people who don't recognize the existence of racial profiling are those people who aren't directly impacted it, and those politicians, whether they be black politicians or brown politicians, who can benefit from the denial of racial profiling. It is ridiculous that in 2017, that we continue to live in a world where racial profiling is a norm and is accepted as a truth from everybody that has been impacted. We're tired of being dismissed. We were dismissed during slavery. We were dismissed during Jim Crow, and we continue to be dismissed today. It's our hope and it's our desire that those people who are sitting here today, you have the ability, you have the power to actually do something. It's a shame that he can stand up here and say that we've been teaching these things for the last 12, 20 years. Right. It's a shame that these things are happening. He should be ashamed to say that, and hopefully this board here has the opportunity to really be able to look at it, and as the sister had recommended, is how can we make sure that these trainings actually impact the way that people interact with us on a daily basis. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Edith Smith, and I want to thank the board for the opportunity to be able to be here and be involved in the public comment. I really want to say that as a member of the San Diego community and being married to an African-American male for 36 years, that what the brother said is very true. I have that experience. I have that life experience. I have the experience of the people around me. And it's not nice here and it's not pretty. I am a member of the SCOP organization. I'm also an educational advocate within the community, and I primarily work within the educational realm, but I'm impacted by the racial profiling realm. What I know to be true is that we train our teachers, we train our educational staff. They have all of the best training quite often, and they go in their classrooms and they shut their doors and they do exactly what they want to do. And believe you me, I know it's no different with the police, okay? You can give them the training, but unless you require them to implement it in their daily process, you're coaching them and you're evaluating them, it's not, it has no effect, okay? They go to their particular positions and they do exactly what they want to do, and they check the box that they've taken this training, okay? And in response to what the young lady said earlier about the collection of the data, I disagree with the fact that we don't identify it to the person, or don't identify it to the person that's being charged, and also to the person that's charging. Okay, I think that we might want to consider not having that as a regular release to the public, but I think all of our police chiefs need to have that information, because as a community member, I want to have a conversation with my police chief about not necessarily the name, but the persons that are being done, what's being done, the trainings that are being done, and how in 1 year we're improving on that each by year. So if we don't have that data as a regular basis where we can have those discussions in our community, this has been a great disservice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm very proud to be here. I'm Brooks Ashby. I am a member of UDW, United Domestic Workers of America. We take care of people with disabilities, seniors, kids with different types of illnesses, cerebral palsy, things of that nature. I've been a member of this community since 1987. I'm going to give you two cases here that are very significant. One is Sagon Penn, even if you know. The next one is there was an African-American lawyer with dreadlocks. He would walk through La Jolla at dusk, window shopping. He was arrested, accosted. He was just harassed tremendously. He eventually sued the city and won. This city is a beautiful city. I've been here a very long time. I also was law enforcement during the Vietnam War. I was the head counselor at Fort Knox, Kentucky. I served in Washington, D.C. We wrote guidelines for the Bureau of Federal Prisons and troops coming back from Vietnam. I know law enforcement. I helped write guidelines for it. The issue is we're looking at force, lethal force, whatever you call it today. African Americans are being stopped 1 out of 5. We're being shot maybe 1 out of 5, 1 out of 3. The last time a police officer stopped me, I rolled my window down halfway. And I said, "You're not going to shoot me now, are you?" He said, "No, sir, I'm not going to shoot you." This is what I'm confronted with now. I have a degree in engineering, mechanical engineering. I worked for a research and development center prior to Vietnam. This is what I'm confronted with today. Our communities are suffering real bad because why? In the white communities, in the white communities, educational level. If you're having a bad time at home with your wife, your children, you're having something going on, don't take it to the street. Don't profile African Americans and say, "Look, I'm going to stop you here." Okay? You have to take a look at our communities and the situation and what it is. The profiling has to end. It has to end today. You have to come up with different type of procedures to stop an individual. I can look at anyone any day at any given time and during the day, see, does he have a weapon on him? Okay, is anything in his pocket? Anything around his belt? Or anything? Am I going to have a confrontation with that individual? Okay. These are things that have to be assessed. There's a Hispanic lady, a young girl, about 18, 19 years old. She was shot 8 times in the back. She was scared of the law enforcement. The stops are because of traffic tickets. And this is on your traffic ticket, it says a violation of a motor vehicle code. It's not a felony. Okay. It's not a law. It's a code. My time is up. Okay. Thank you very much. Let's do something about this.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Colleen Cusack. I've been a criminal defense attorney in San Diego for 25 years. I'm talking really fast, I know. I have a lot to say. 25 years of handling murder cases, working in felony and misdemeanor cases, state and federal, trial and appeals. But until I got into infraction court in the last 2 years, conducting a pro bono traffic court clinic, I did not know how much injustice there was in our courts. 5.5 million criminal filings in 2016. Out of those, 4.5 million were infractions. That means 4.5 million who don't have the benefit of counsel. That's where the injustice that happens in these profile cases continues in infraction court when they're unrepresented, and it is sickening to me. We need data collection to continue in the Superior Court in terms of the case outcomes that are happening as a result of these stops. The police officers sitting in these courts have a lot of time on their hands waiting for the case to be called. There's not going to be any time, any problem with them being able to do this. Also, I have concerns about whether we're taking the subjective opinion of what police officers believe people are being pulled over for. They're guessing as terms of their demographics and not comparing that with the reality. So I'd like some sort of procedure where the individual stopped is allowed to fill in a form voluntarily so that somehow these numbers can be compared from what the police officer thinks to what the reality actually is. I have problems with the body camera evidence. All the San Diego Police Department officers are required to have that camera on, but they're only presenting that evidence in traffic court trials when it helps them. And the motorists do not have information on how to get this information, on how to get this evidence. I just filed a complaint with San Diego PD because of perjury in a case where the officer did not use the body cam. It went up on appeal, and appeal showed that my client was telling the truth, and the officer committed perjury against a homeless man. There's a lot of changes that need to be made, and 3 minutes isn't enough to address them. I tried to ask how I can contact each of these board members individually to give them more information about the injustices I've witnessed and the recommendations I have, and there doesn't seem to be a streamlined procedure for that. You're here in San Diego once a year, and I get 3 minutes, and that's not enough. Thank you.
Thank you. But I just want to clarify, we've received lots of letters from stakeholders, so if you want to address the board, I'm sure all of us would want to hear from you. You submit that to the Department of Justice, and the board members will get a copy. We've got a copy of most stakeholders' letters.
Hello, and thank you for letting me speak. My name is Navar Perry. I'm a member of People Power. It's a group of citizens who are working to carry out and help achieve some of the efforts that the ACLU is attempting to achieve. We're a bunch of citizens who just live here. What I want to speak to you about primarily is your annual report. It's a great thing to have this annual report. We have one here in San Diego. The police chief here, Shelley Zimmerman, started doing this. She acknowledged that bias exists, which was a great thing for her to acknowledge. Well, I thought most people knew that, but she acknowledged it. And when we had a meeting with Shelley Zimmerman, the People Power group here, a couple of weeks ago, we applauded her for that and applauded her for instituting a study. You may have problems with the nature of the study, the methodology, but she instituted a study that would do some analysis of what was going on in this city. And I asked her at that meeting, will we be able to talk to you in the future about improving the quality of this study, updating it, getting more information, finding out exactly what's going on? She says, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to do this anymore because AB 953 is taking over and we won't be able to give you any more information. I want to ask you, please, when you get this information all gathered at the Attorney General's office and you give your annual report, and I know it says you have to disaggregate it, don't just give us some numbers. Give us full reports for each county, for the sheriff in every county, for the police departments in every county, so we can see what's going on in our county, in our area, and know what we can do, and we want recommendations for each of those law enforcement agencies. We want analysis for each of those law enforcement agencies, and we want specific training suggestions for our own local areas. What's going on in Reading is not necessarily what's happening here in San Diego, so we want it to be done locally. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
My name is Karen Villa. I work with San Diego Community College District, and my parents are immigrants from the Philippines. My story starts at Pride. A group of friends had driven from LA to meet us at Imperial Beach. We were sitting and laughing in a small circle, meeting others who don't go to Pride because it's too expensive, but have small get-togethers like this one. We were Black, Latino, Asian queers at the beach. I was 25, and I had just come out of the closet a couple years earlier. That night, the police had driven onto the beach, and their sirens went off. My friends knew something was up and ran, but I froze and listened to the police's instructions. Don't move. The police took my license, and I stood with one officer as another ran it through their system. It took at least 20 to 25 minutes. I had a prior traffic violation that was being resolved. They brought it up and handcuffed me. I was put in the back of the vehicle, where they took turns digging into my violation, tormenting me about what they could do, how they would suspend my license, kept asking me over and over what I was doing at the beach. I was held for over an hour and a half as the cops gestured back and forth, threatening me with how they were going to destroy my life. I had no idea what I was facing, if they were going to put me in jail, let me go, or something worse. I was alone, handcuffed, in the back of a vehicle with two men in a car, isolated in the middle of the night. Now, I work in education, so I'm always looking for the learning outcome of a lesson. But at that moment, the state taught me that who I am, a queer Filipino woman, masculine at the time, whose immigrant parents worked hard to defend this country and its values in the Department of Defense, is not supposed to be at the beach. I am not supposed to be queer. I am not supposed to be brown. There's nothing else that the state taught me that night.
Thank you. Next.
Good evening, DOJ, Ripper Board. I've heard a lot of words thrown around today, and
You can lift that up a little higher.
I don't even want to use a microphone.
Okay.
But I heard a lot of words thrown around. Here, I don't want to use it. But one word that has not been said today is accountability. And I keep asking myself, when will the police finally take accountability for the lives that have been lost, the lives that have been taken from people, going from one destination point to the next, not doing anything risky, not jumping off of buildings, not trying to catch bullets with your mouth, but just going from one destination to the next. When will you all take accountability for the act of committing murder because you claim to all be afraid? And there's this thing about it being not all of them are bad cops, but you all use the same excuses. You all use the same rhetoric of, oh, well, I felt like my life was in danger. I was following protocol, or whatever the case may be. You all say the same thing. So how can I differentiate the good cops from the bad cops when you all do the same things, you all use the same excuses, and you all blame the victims? You know, and it never changes. Like you say 25 years, I mean, it hasn't changed since slavery. You were stringing black people up by the neck. You were, making parades about it. And, further on down the line today, even some of you have the audacity to be police and use the same excuses and hurt the same people. And then you want to say, oh, well, we have to wait until the evidence comes out. Well, you guys want to withhold the evidence from the people so that we can have a proper analysis of what happened and the violations of our rights, yet there's not even a standard protocol of what is to be done when you violate our rights, other than the police move from one jurisdiction to the next without their history being put on display for the public, when the public are the ones that pay your salary. There was a bill that was recently passed, Measure Z in Riverside, which is 1% tax increase that goes into the public fund, and with that money, the city is hiring more police. They're not doing what they promised to do. They promised to increase the revenue of the city. Hiring police does not increase the revenue of the city. It actually decreases the revenue, because those police officers do not live in the city that they work in. So they don't spend that money in that city. Their tax dollars don't go towards that city. So we're spending money for what? For us to be harassed, for us to be killed, for us to be targets, for our children to look at themselves like they're less than human beings because you guys have a job to do and you fear for your lives, and that's the excuse you use. I think you guys need to start talking more about accountability at these things and actually make this board worth something more than a 25-year standard of getting nothing done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Arami Glass. I'm with Pico, California. I also do a lot of work with the police throughout the community. And so I wanted to come from a standpoint from a person who works with the police, right? It is very sad for me to sit there and hear the presentation in regards to post. Because if our police have been being trained in these areas that we have concern or we have huge issues in, and we are still dealing with the same issues, that is a problem. We are failing. We have an F. We talk about how training. I think of it like this. If you continue to try to cut down a tree without digging up the roots, the tree is just going to continue to grow back. We have to get our hands dirty. We have to dig up the roots. This is the time. In San Diego, we have a lot of boards with no teeth, and I'm asking you guys to have teeth. I'm asking you guys to fight for people, fight for the people on the streets, fight for the young men who just got bit by the dogs, got basically eaten. It was a horrible, horrific situation. Fight for the gang members who aren't committing crimes but are being documented as gang members, probably aren't gang members. Fight for them. Be the voice for them. Have teeth.
Hi, my name is Leah Blake. I'm 16 and I'm with Pico, California and SDOP. I don't want to take too much time, but I'd like to start off saying I used to read a lot of werewolf stories. And I say that because in these stories they'd have rogue wolves. These wolves would separate from the pack because they didn't agree with the laws, customs, and leadership that the rest of the pack adhered to. I say that because I don't believe in rogue cops. It makes no sense. The criminal justice system as we know it today was formed after slavery ended in order to continue to oppress and suppress black people. This was furthered and perpetuated by Jim Crow segregation, the war on drugs, and racial profiling. The thing that these all have in common is it uses race to oppress and suppress people of color. If there are rogue cops, they can't be rogue because the things that they're doing are simply perpetuating and complying with the core values of the organization for which they work. The criminal justice system, if the criminal justice system wasn't systemically racist, and if the training was as good as you say it is, then it should be able to weed out these supposedly rogue cops. The training should be so well oiled that these rogue cops would be weeded out of the system. They wouldn't be on the streets policing people, treating people any type of way, pulling people over for no other reason besides the color of their skin. That's right, amen. And a while ago, I had a San Diego police officer tell me that, like someone else in here said, California has the best police training in the nation. A week later, Alfred Olenga was killed. That was not a standalone event. Countless fatal and critical police encounters that should have been de-escalated occurred not only across the nation, but around the globe. We need better and efficient training in de-escalation and cultural understanding, and then a system of accountability to ensure that these police officers are carrying out the training that they just got. There should be no reason that police officers are getting these trainings supposedly 24 hours every 24 months, and yet turning around, going back to the police departments, going into the streets, and not doing what they were supposedly taught. There must be actual change. Creating policies for this system is like putting Band-Aids on a broken leg. It's not doing anything. It's not fixing anything. This system is inherently broken. You cannot fix a system that is broken by making tiny little changes and restorative justice. There's nothing to restore. We need to transform the system and transform the thought process and the hearts of these police officers, of the DOJ, of all. Oh, I'm sorry, my time's up, but thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kyle Brandon. I have a long history with the police. First off, I have a mother who works with the Los Angeles Police Department. My uncle is a former police officer with the Venice Division in Los Angeles as well. And many other people who I consider my brothers working in Los Angeles, San Bernardino, and San Diego in the police departments. So I'm very well versed in my rights and my responsibilities. As a 12-year-old, I experienced my first pullover walking from a park playing basketball. This persisted until I was 18 years old and moved out of Los Angeles. Same park, same time, every week. Me and the officer got to know each other by name, but yet and still I was pulled over, questioned, and treated as a thug. Fast forward to San Diego, I get admitted into San Diego State. First day, I'm pulled over by the police there, waiting for AAA to come and get my car. Was asked questions, asked why I was at the school. I said, because I'm a student. Well, why are you here? Because I live here. I mean, this is what I'm doing and who I am. So that just covers a brief synopsis of my experience with police profiling. I recently have gotten married and had a child. And it has scared me coming home from a job that had me working at all hours of the night, where I knew I had to blast loud music in order to stay awake, to get home, being pulled over. I never knew what I was going to get with all the police shootings and things that I was hearing about. One night I did get pulled over around 1 o'clock in the morning, and all I could do was hope and pray. So now every day I look at my little girl and I tell her I love her, and I hope that I can get home safe to you. I cannot say the same thing for my cousin, Charlena Lyles, who was shot and killed by Seattle police not more than 3 weeks ago. We just held a vigil for her in Los Angeles, and just know this is real pain. When we come here and speak to you, it's from our hearts. It's not because we're angry that that you're just police officers. We're angry because nothing is being done, and we want to see real change. Thank you.
That's right.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karen Glover. I'm a professor at Cal State San Marcos, which is about a half an hour down the road. My life's work is racial profiling studies. So many of you know that we have had racial profiling studies for a long time, for decades now. So we have a lot of data collection, and I understand the beauty of this particular legislation going further with different types of statuses, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the work that y'all are doing as well. But those studies don't go very far. We have a ton of them. We have a ton of literature that tells us about data collection. And overwhelmingly, that data collection tells us that there's racial disparity. So part of what I want to bring up is this idea that, do y'all have any kind of plan or thinking about with this legislation and the general ground of what you're trying to do with holding people accountable when that disparity is found? There's the important part of addressing the racial profiling stuff through training, etc. But what I would suggest is that when the disparity is found, which it will be found, that you have some serious accountability issues departmentally. The second point I want to make is the theoretical ground that you seem to be relying on a lot, which is this idea of implicit bias and procedural justice, is problematic. And that is, it's based upon a really micro level issue. It's really this idea of, do police officers treat us well one-on-one when we're with them? When the issue is more structural, the issue is police officers engaging in harmful behavior and not getting held accountable for it time and time again. That's the larger issue. For instance, just very quickly, in San Diego, our police chief, I have a little bit different read of it than the gentleman earlier, but our police chief at a city council meeting was confronted with that report that we recently had that showed, the report was problematic, but it showed really serious racial disparity in San Diego. And what she did to respond to that report about her police department was say, probably 5 times in a row, she kept getting pressed by the city council people to say it. And about 5 times in a row, she said, everybody is biased. Everybody has bias. And by doing that, she's marginalizing and silencing the real issue that was brought up in that report and that y'all are trying to remedy on some level. So that's a downside of implicit bias and procedural justice. The work of the board needs to be linked to larger justice actions related to education, housing, employment, political voice. Those are the structural issues. And also, the laws that allow cops to get off need to be changed.
Yeah, that's right. Lock them up.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tasha Williamson. You're also going to hear video being played where you'll hear sirens and screams. That's what we have to deal with. We don't get to sit in rooms of silence and hear each other's voices. We actually live in the pain. You will be hearing the actual video of the young man who was mauled by the dog. You will hear his screams. You will hear his pain because the police officer couldn't get the dog off of the man. So he was twisting and turning him while he was on the ground, handcuffed, stomach and face down, while the dog kept grip on his arm. He's in the hospital 3 days later. This was 3 days ago. And we're still dealing with these things. When people sit up here and talk to you, it's because they're in pain. The man who sat before you, or came before, the lady before me, talks about that pain. This is real pain. And as a board, I have to kind of, look at, are you guys relevant? How are you relevant? Because we have an administration with Trump and Pence and the Gang of Eight that are undocumented, but yet they run our country. And the person who organized this board is no longer there to represent you guys, to fight for you guys. You have a different face. I don't see where you have the teeth that people are talking about when we live in cities in California that have corruption, racism, even within their systems. Our black and brown and Asian officers are dealing with it. Their children are dealing with it. And yet we have nobody that is accountable for it. So we think that we're going to change the outside before we change the inside. I don't think so. I think that we don't deal with the real things. This was a de-escalation situation. This person was homeless. He had no shoes, no shirt. He was high. There was no pert. There was a dog that mauled him to the point where he had to be in the hospital for 3 days now under the guard of police who injured him. His actions did not warrant his injuries. These are the things that black and brown people deal with every day. We hear these screams, we hear the sirens, we hear the helicopters. Not one person's talk about trauma informed. When one person is hurt, it's a whole community. You're looking at 78,000 people sometimes or more in communities, in districts that are traumatized by the trauma of what police do wrong. They don't build relationships. We look at community-oriented policing, and it is not as the DOJ has instructed. They believe that emails, phone calls, and going to meetings is community-oriented policing. That is not it. And until we get it right, until you guys are serious about the roles that you play and do the things that you do and understand the pain of the people that are impacted, these boards will mean nothing.
Thank you.
My name is Umar Farouk. Again, part of a political community, also like a boycott it. And again, that video to me is a bunch of bullshit. Straight up. My boy said I keep it 100, I should keep it 60, I keep it 2, I keep it 1,000. I'm keeping it 100. That video is straight bullshit to me. There's no way I'm sitting across the table from any car to pull me over. I've been pulled over multiple times. I stay in Southeast. I grew up in Southeast. Every time I get in my car, I know I'm probably going to get pulled over.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right.
Yes, that part. It's bullshit. There's no way I should get in my car and got a fear of police pulling me over every single day. I had a cop in front of me at a stoplight. I'm making a U-turn. I made that U-turn, in my head I already knew you were going to pull me over. For nothing. Look in the mirror, and I see that cop car speeding behind the car behind me, just to get behind me. And he blurted me for no reason whatsoever. I asked, what you pull me over for? Your tags. First of all, my tags not expired. And second of all, you can't see my tags from the front of my car. When they're on the back of my car. There's no way possible. And that incident, I'm driving down Imperial Avenue. Most of you know where Imperial Avenue is at. A cop makes a cop's in the left lane, makes a right turn just to get behind me and pull me over for no reason whatsoever. Only thing I can tell of, color of my skin. Any other racial profile that does not exist, you're lying to yourself. And y'all on this board, this thing doesn't exist, you're lying to yourself also. Something has to change. In this room, it starts now.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Terrence Stewart.
I am a community organizer with Inland Congregations United for Change, ICUC. We under the HEAT campaign. HEAT stands for Hiring, Equipment, Accountability, and Training. We look at directly at policing into these 4 themes. And what we have done is we have done listening sessions in our community, and we have talked to clergy, police, the community, and everybody else. And I say, and everybody say the system is broken. And I think that's a lie.
That's right.
I believe the system is doing exactly what it was meant to do. You know, it's just like the concept of race. It's a competition. When you think of race, it's a competition of horses or any other animal where there's a first place winner and there's a last place winner, and the last place winner goes to the glue factory. And this is what's been going on. And I had to tell my friends, why are they oppressing us? It's the same thing. What's been happening systematically. If you know you can't beat somebody, you cheat them. And I've been feeling like this is the reason why y'all been cheating, because y'all don't want us to advance. You know, y'all been perpetuating this system of white supremacy, and then y'all sitting here thinking everything's a game and ain't nobody playing. These are my life. These are my loved ones. This is my friends. One of my best friends I grew up got tased to death. Tased. You know, my homie Baby Cass, Jermaine Love, man. And like, it hurts my heart to this day. I have his name tattooed on me, and every day I think of this. And then every day I walk with my son in San Bernardino, California, where I live at, and ain't no telling what might happen. You know? And like, the thing about it is, you cops are supposed to be heroes, and then y'all live under this code with a blue line and like keep secrets and all this stuff and make it like whistleblowing and snitching. You know, that's wrong. And like, it ain't about doing what's right no more. It's about protecting the system that's keeping money in y'all pockets to keep my people oppressed. And that's what y'all was meant to do from the beginning, because they knew in the Bacon Rebellion that if poor whites and poor blacks got together, y'all people who the elites wouldn't be in power. So y'all protecting y'all interests at the pain of my people.
Teach, brother, teach.
At the pain of my people. You know, and if y'all talking about y'all trying to make a difference, and that's why y'all become police and all that stuff, then do your job. Because what's going on is the real crime. And if you had real justice, we'll watch the system flip itself inside out.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. My name is Brian Marvel. I'm president of the San Diego Police Officers Association. I'm the union that represents all the sworn officers for the city of San Diego. Appreciate you coming to San Diego and giving us an opportunity to speak to you. And I understand the need for this bill and why it was presented and passed at the state. But part of what I see the advisory board, outside of looking at the stop data information, is being able to talk to the Attorney General. And we talk a lot about training. I hear elected officials always say cops need more training here, there, everywhere. But the governor's budget just cut $9 million out of post. And that's money that gets reimbursed to the agencies to train their officers on the things that are important to the communities. And I think as an advisory board, you should come together and get the Attorney General to be a very public advocate to make sure that the funds for this training are not cut in the future and they're actually expanded so we can get more of the training that needs to be done at all levels. And to be able to do that is going to require this advisory board to want to force the Attorney General to make that. The other thing is, I saw the Post video, and there's a lot of people complaining about that's not the truth. But I can tell you in San Diego, my association has embraced a program called Game Changers. We're actually taking people from the community and sitting down with cops that are working on the street. I'm not there, chiefs aren't there, these are officers working the street, these are community members that we're dealing with on a regular basis. We're sitting at a table, and we're having a conversation. May not look like the community-oriented policing that the federal government's passed, but it's something that's working here. I'm working with Sean Shepard, who's actually running the program. I think it's a program that if we can get it fully running here in San Diego, can be transplanted throughout the state of California and throughout the nation. It's a good opportunity to have that one-on-one conversation that we saw in that video that Post did. Third, regarding the collection of the data, it was stated the average takes about 2.5 minutes to fill out that form. But in the grand scheme of things, we need to look at the entire time of the stop. One of the things that would be nice if this advisory board would advocate, the Department of Motor Vehicles puts all of the information you're looking for on somebody's driver's license. An officer can just swipe it into the system, it auto-populates, and they're done. You collect all the data you want directly to the state, and then we can look at that from there. Those are the things that I'd recommend. Thank you for my time.
Excuse me, I'd like to say one thing. We have been standing in line patiently, waiting to give public comment. I got the permission of this gentleman to come and say a brief moment before you. I want to say I watched this gentleman stand there forever and ever. He refused to get in the line. This is the white supremacy that we deal with in San Diego. He didn't think he was good enough to stand in line like everybody else and have their say. And he just jumped the line from over here. This is what we deal with because he feels entitled to not be amongst the people. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Riley Avila. I'm a recent graduate from USD, and I currently live here in San Diego, in the college area. And although I am privileged, and I like to reiterate that statement, that it is a privilege to not have negative or unwarranted interactions with the police, this is not the case for even a person that I live with, who I care dearly about, who is a black individual by the name of Kim Simon. And Kim uses the trolley system to get to work because he doesn't have a car as transportation. And during these trolley rides, he watches as every other passenger gets their ticket checked and moved on, while when there has been multiple occasions where a police officer will stop him, look at him like he's a criminal, and ask him for his identification on top of his ticket, on top of where he's going, to make sure that he isn't doing what they think that he is going, instead of where he's actually going to go to work and make his ends meet. Now, the importance of this is a bill without implementation is just words, and data without accountability are just numbers. So it is of great importance matter that this board not only make sure that these regulations are implemented within our police departments, but when this data is collected, that they are held accountable for all the data that is proven and legitimizes all the experiences of everyone that is wrongfully stopped by the police, including my friend. And hopefully that will not have to be me as well in the future. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jamie Wilson. I live in Southeast San Diego, and unfortunately our community's complaints and cries haven't been and aren't enough to get through to anyone. So we need things like the SDSU racial profiling study, and we need AB 953 to provide the support for our cries, so that appropriate actions and changes can take place. AB 953 will begin to immediately do one of two things. It will stop some law enforcement officers from making the stops based on color, or officers will continue to stop as usual, and the city will then be provided the information and numbers they need to move forward in ceasing the stops based on color. Either way, our communities are winning and our kids are winning. In March of 2016, 5 black youth ages 14 to 16 years old were stopped walking through Memorial Park in Southeast San Diego at 3:30 in the afternoon. They were stopped for being young, male, and black in Southeast San Diego. One of these boys was my son. My son knew in March of 2016 that he was stopped for being black. I knew he was stopped for being black. And in June of 2016, one of the officers who made the stop was asked in a court of law if he would have stopped my son or the other 4 boys had they been white, wearing the same thing on the same day in the same place at the same time. And he said he didn't know. And as much as I appreciate that officer's honesty, I'm equally disturbed, as you should be, that this is our reality. Although my 16-year-old son already knew it, he sat in the same room and listened to a grown man wearing a badge tell him it. My 2 oldest sons are 19 and 17 years old, and although they have no criminal record, they've been stopped and handcuffed multiple times. These stops not only have a lasting impact on our children, they make our life stressful and difficult for us as parents in so many ways. I could give you information and scenarios for hours. Do what needs to be done to move forward with AB 953.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's hard to follow. Give her a hand again. So she did a good job. My name is Mikhail Hussein. I'm the actually president of United Tax Workers of San Diego. I participate different kind of board. Actually, I don't wanna go into all those boards I participate. But one of the things actually I want to mention about racial profiling, I don't think there is a doubt in our community. I advocate on behalf of the taxi driver in the city of San Diego, and I deal every day actually on those issues. So one of the key points, I will mention two things, and I will talk about two things of my personal life. One of the key things about taxi drivers, when they've been harassed, stopped, intimidated, and give them ticket, they say, okay, you should know better, in other words. So we give you, so if you look at it, you should know better. That means that they're the one who's serving for the community, taking them wherever they want to go, especially in night out for Saturday, Sundays. So giving them ticket actually, not even enforcing like front of the line privilege. So what they do actually, if you have a taxi on the other side, they stop you and they give you a ticket. If you are away your car 100 feet, they will give you a ticket. If they, you see so many provision, in terms of the city of San Diego. So I don't want to get into that. So my personal life, I've been actually stopped in front of nearby my house with my son, 16 years old at that time. And I asked the officers, two officers, one was holding his gun and the other one was interrogating me. And I asked the officer, what's the problem? He mentioned that I was on the phone. That's a funny thing, actually. I said, sir, you want to go into my phone and check? There's no way I'm going to be on phone. I know what I'm doing. So I win that case. So recently what happened for my family, my daughter, she was headscarf for Muslim, she's Muslim, so she a cover. And I'm talking to my daughter today. The reason I'm here for my daughter. She got an accident back in January this year, the 2nd. And she was the right of the way. So my daughter, she was at that time hit so hard, she could not speak. So someone called me and said, okay, your daughter, she got an accident. I went in there and there's 3 officers. And unfortunately, they were white officers. Couple of them, I talked to them, they say, okay, you know what? We don't know who's wrong, who's right. I say, it's obvious. This light, there's no left turn. So this gentleman must be running the red light, you can see it. So they say, don't worry, that's the reason we have insurance, right? So at the end, one of the officers come to me and he say, by the way, your daughter, she have the right of the way. So the report, when the report come out, the officer swear in saying that, car number 1, which is my daughter, because she is wearing a Muslim headscarf, she was wrong. And we lost the case because of that. So that tells you the white gentleman who ran the red light actually given me the privilege over my daughter. So that's unacceptable. So all I'm saying actually, you guys, you have to go back and especially I'm advising all of you to, I can give you stories after stories after story. My time is out, but anyway, we have to make sure we have to pass this legislation and making sure that we've been protected for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me, before you start, can I get a kind of a sense of how many more speakers there is? Okay, great. About 4 or 5?
No, like
5
or 8.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Peter Biebring. I'm Director of Police Practice for the ACLU of Southern California. I actually want to start by thanking all the people who came up here and had the courage to share their personal stories and the stories of their community, and hope that gives all of us in the room, advocates, board members, and the DOJ, continued impetus to move forward and enact the full promise of AB 953. And make sure that we get this data, that we find out more about what's actually going on so that we can implement real data-driven solutions and help make sure that the next 25 years of training and policy and practice around racial profiling are more effective than the last 25 years. I just want to make a few points as briefly as I can. I mean, first of all, on the regulations, I know that they're coming out shortly. I did want to reiterate the importance of getting those out soon. It sounds like that's happening. Obviously, there's something of a time crunch, and we want to make sure that that there is adequate time that this is implemented successfully, and that the regulations, when they do come out, as it sounds like they will, contain the recommendations of this board that were made in January, as well as the advocates' recommendations that additional data elements be included, including sexual orientation and disability. With respect to the issues around subcommittees and the board's report, a couple of points with respect to the work on post. I just want to say I was actually one of the subject matter experts in the 2014 racial profiling update training, and I wanted to echo Professor Eberhardt's comment that is a model that I strongly believe, having participated in that process, we should move on from and move towards more evidence-based practices and less just asking people who are figures in that what they think should happen. We need to, the whole reason we are doing this is so that we can use data to test and make sure that we are effectively not just changing people's perception of what's going on, but what's going on the street. And second, I wanted to urge this board to address, both in its committee structure and in its report, community experiences, so that this board can collect not only quantitative data, but qualitative data, so that the kinds of testimony like we've heard today are captured and reported as a crucial part of the account of what is happening with bias in policing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Pastor Cornelius Bowser, pastor of Charity Apostolic Church here in San Diego off of 30th and Ocean View. I'm also a member of SDOP, San Diego Organizing Project, and also a member of CAS, which stands for Community Assistance Support Team, which the work that we do, I heard Brian mention the game changes, but didn't mention CAS. But CAS, we also collaborate and partner with San Diego Police Department. We have made impact in the city of San Diego by reducing gang violence. I am a former gang member myself, and so that's why I take a great interest in trying to reduce gang violence, because I was a part of starting all the violence here in the city of San Diego. In the process of helping young men that are trapped in this gang lifestyle, I come to realize that I was coming up against more than just kids that are in gangs and a lack of resources, but coming up against a system that is basically institutional racist. And so I want to start with a quote from Bill Quigley, and I quote, "The biggest crime in the U.S. criminal justice system is that it is race-based institution where African Americans are directly targeted and punished in a much more aggressive way than white people." End of quote. And I know personally, I'm 54 years old, but as a young man coming up, I faced all type of racial discrimination and racial profiling and so on. But my story is a little different in that I was actually kidnapped by the police, taken to the train tracks and assaulted and left there and so on. And I was also at one time robbed by the police, and also at another time I was falsely accused a couple of times, had to do time for that. So I have a bad, not a negative past with the police, but we also work with them. And so today all I want to let you know is that when it comes to the racial profiling report and what we're dealing with here, in the city of San Diego, between January 1st, 2014 and December 31st, 2015, blacks were subject to field interviews 2.4 times the rate of matched white drivers. And looking at that, we have not yet had our chief Zimmerman to acknowledge that racial profiling exists in San Diego. And so we need this board to come up with policies that's going to be clear and reveal whether or not there are racial disparities or racial profiling, and also to come up with accountability so that we don't just have data and we look at it and that's it, but we also are able to hold people accountable that are out there racial profiling from the top down to the bottom. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Rosa Akil with Policy Link and the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color. I also want to thank all the folks that came today that took off of work to come and show up and share your stories. I know it's really hard and exhausting to do all of that. So I think folks have already made the case for why trying to fix a system that is rooted in white supremacy is not fixable, right? And until we completely dismantle the existing system and create something new that actually creates public safety, we're going to be in front of you probably for the rest of our lives. That being said, I think it's interesting that the post presentation earlier was really discouraging. It reminded me of why this is such a problem. But I think if we're trying to assess whether a procedural justice training, for example, is working, asking police officers if they think it's working is ridiculous. It is contrary to notions of common sense. Who you should be asking if it's working are the communities of color that are harassed every single day that you heard today. Ask them, ask us if it's working, if we feel respected. Because asking yourself that question, come on, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We know how all that works. The second thing is that no matter how amazing your training module is, no matter how gold standard it is, no matter whether y'all think it's the best one in the country, and if that's the case, that's really, really depressing, then it will not diminish or destroy the inherent white supremacy that is rooted in this system of policing in this country. And so I would encourage you to look at models outside of this country, because this country has not gotten it right. Finally, I don't know if anyone else caught this, and I'm shaking because I'm floored by it. And I don't know why I continue to be surprised by these things, but the gentleman that did the post presentation when Pastor McBride had asked him about de-escalation and how do we better respond to that. His response was, and he said, well, we can't train for that. He actually said, we can't train for that. If a guy doesn't put his hands on the steering wheel and I tell him to do that, well, he's got to do what he's got to do. If that doesn't sound alarms in the heart of every police officer that's in this room, then you should resign immediately, because we don't want you on the streets. We don't need you on the streets, because you're probably going to be the one pulling the trigger on my friend, my husband, my family, and we don't need that. So until we actually deal with the root causes of the disease that is white supremacy that is embedded in law enforcement, we will not change anything, and we will continue to fear you every single day we walk out the door.
As the next speaker is coming up, if we could just have all the rest of the speakers, I think there was like 2 or 3 more. Are the rest of the speakers, can you just raise them? So we just know those will be our last speakers. Just so that we know where the line is. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Fayaz Nawabi, and I am a representative from CARE San Diego, the Council on American Islamic Relations. In addition, I sit on the Trustee Advisory Council for the San Diego Community College District, representing about 130,000 students here in San Diego County. I just wanted to thank you all for holding this hearing, and thank the DOJ and advocacy groups, I see many of you here already, for organizing this and hearing our concerns of the community. I would also like to echo some of the other speakers about the importance of implementing AB 953 and properly implementing that throughout the entire state. In addition, there's a lot of concerns from my community. I do represent a lot of the Muslims, that roughly 120,000 Muslims here in San Diego, and there's been a lot of targeting of our community, especially right now with this new administration in power. And we want to make sure that our concerns are heard, that we are not, just people that should be your spies to spy on other terrorists or all these different things that folks are making up all the times, but we are part of the community, and that we would love to work with law enforcement, but at the same time we want to know that our community is respected, our boundaries are respected, and that we would be interested in working so long as our community is respected and our boundaries are respected. In addition, there is issues of racial profiling going on in the city of ours, as our previous speaker mentioned just 2 speakers ago, he did mention about that study that was released by San Diego State University, in which roughly 2.5 or 2.4% of the times, our African American sisters and brothers are targeted more than people that are white. So that's a concern, and we want to make sure that this kind of disparity is mitigated to the best of our abilities and be able to work with the communities and not target them. Community policing is something that would be something more approachable. You know, talk with the community, talk with the kids, organize basketball leagues, football leagues, whatever. Work with us, you know, see us on the ground, see our concerns, and not just, you know, put on a badge. Sometimes that really intimidates people, and people feel like that's an occupying force. But when you're on the ground with kids, you know, working with us, playing with us, you know, talking to us, you know, being real with us, then we'll have more respect for law enforcement and be able to be more receptive to some of the concerns that law enforcement has. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Ismahan Abdullahi. I'm the Director of Community Partnership and Civic Engagement with PANA, Partnership for the Advancement of New Americans. And I'm really happy that we're able to have hearings such as these to hear the stories, the pain in people's voices as they tell their experiences and reflect the experiences of so many others as well. Being a Muslim woman and being visibly Muslim, every day that I walk out of that house, and again, being the second oldest out of 10 children, and being a refugee, every day that we leave that house, I worry for myself, for my sisters, for my brothers. Is it going to be some bigotry or Islamophobic things that they have to deal with? Or is it going to be just them living their daily lives and being profiled? And not knowing at the end of the day who's coming home and who's not coming home. And not being able to feel safe in a country that we came to feel safe in. And one of the things that I've always said is being a refugee and leaving Somalia, I felt as if we left a country that was torn apart by civil war. Didn't realize we were coming to a country that was torn apart by the soul because of this racial discrimination and institutionalized oppression that a lot of our families and our communities do face. One of the things that I'm here to speak about is the lived experiences that we went through, the lived experiences that so many of our families went through, and the pain is real. The study that came out with SDSU, even looking at that and the way that it has been watered down, we don't need a study to validate our experiences. That study is mainly to help us move towards action, and when those improvements and those actions that have been recommended have not been taken, the community loses trust. When we look at law enforcement, and I have family members who are in law enforcement, it's not about individuals. It's not about individual and the work that they're doing. It's about the institution in general and how we can shape it to be one that is reflective of community policing and being able to trust the individuals that are public servants that are there to serve and protect. And it shouldn't be anything more than that. They're here to serve and protect. Just in the past couple of years, in the past, the Somali community has dealt with being re-traumatized when they were being stopped by police officers and being asked about their tribal affiliations. Their tribal affiliations. And that's what they escaped Somalia from. When the community talks about racial profiling, when the community talks about being depicted or being seen as the other and telling their experiences, oftentimes those who are not near those experiences don't understand. And oftentimes the way I feel is we shouldn't be put in a position where we have to talk about our experiences, talk about our pain for others to understand us. Human empathy is that basic feeling of not even being able to understand someone else's pain, not being able to walk in their shoes, but being human enough to recognize the pain and say, I may not understand it, but I'm there with you. So I'm supporting of this legislation, and I really hope that we realize the importance of these guidelines and take it upon ourselves as a mantle of trust to really make sure that we are prioritizing community members, the voices and the experiences that they're sharing. And I know my time's up, and so I'll wrap up right now. But listen to these stories, listen to the pain in these stories, and realize that even if you're not near those experiences, you have a duty upon yourself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Emily Howe. I'm the great-great-granddaughter of Chief of Police Frederick Mitchell of Newton, Massachusetts. I deeply respect the duty to protect and serve and the enormous responsibility before our officers. With family history tracing back hundreds of years in this country, I also understand what it's like to be treated differently, purely based on the color of my skin. Now, we know that Black and Latino San Diegans have been treated differently and have disproportionate contact with police. Having provided legal assistance here in San Diego, I've heard time and time again complaints of pretextual stops. For instance, where a person receives a cell phone ticket, even with a hands-free device built into their vehicle. This may be the only time a person's called into court, and it leaves an indelible impression about justice here in America. Imagine having to take the bus up to Kearny Mesa for an 8 a.m. appearance, time off after work, another day off of work, failures to appear, and perhaps suspensions of your license so you cannot even work to feed your family. These seemingly benign encounters with civilians catalyze into hundreds, thousands of dollars in fines, or a fatal shooting. And that ended up being my neighbor Richard Alongo's son, Alfred. Currently, as researchers at the Center on Policy Initiatives, we support the swift implementation of AB 953, an assurance that demographic data is accessible on traffic stops, and case outcomes are readily available throughout the county. The SDSU report reinforces what individuals already knew. Police disproportionately stop and search people of color, despite the fact that they are less likely to be carrying contraband. You have the enormous opportunity to protect and serve and to create necessary change. We hope you do. Thank you.
Thank you. This will be our last speaker.
Hi, thank you guys for being here. I'm Brittany. I've been living here for 4 years now from Chicago. Don't throw any biases on that. But so a lot of people today have been talking about accountability. And honestly, I agree. I'm not going to repeat what everyone said, but I full-heartedly agree. I want to talk about professionalism and the initial response or the initial approach we get when we're pulled over or, you know, when we're stopped by cops. A negative approach will cause a negative response. And there's no way that that's acceptable, and that should be acceptable for anyone. I've seen multiple times and heard multiple stories where as soon as someone gets pulled over by a cop, they're getting cursed at right away. What the F are you doing here? What the F is going on? Who the F are you? Or anything like that. That's not acceptable. Of course, if someone comes to me and says, you know, what the F are you doing here? I'm going to probably ask, what the F do you want? So if one person comes up and they're negative, the next person will be negative. That's just common communication. So we need to hold our cops accountable on how they have their initial approach with our citizens. As far as the training is concerned and the game changers, it sounds like a really wonderful idea, but what I would recommend is not just the cops being with the community, but their authorities as well. That way you can hold them accountable if they do anything out of, really if they try to cover things up, because we know that story all too well for anyone. So everyone needs to be held accountable. Everyone needs to get to know their community. That's just how I feel wholeheartedly. So one comparison that a lot of people make all the time is cop killings compared to gang killings. Let's think critically here. The issue is we're making that comparison. We're comparing our cops to gang members. We should not be able to do that. Our cops are here to protect us. We should not be afraid of our police officers. We should feel like they are protecting everyone, every single one of us. I mean, and honestly, a traffic violation, that shouldn't be an immediate death penalty for anyone whatsoever. You know, we hear a lot of stories about mothers and parents who send their kids off to war, and we feel for those stories. Well, imagine mothers and parents of color who send their kids out to school and who are afraid every single day that their sons and their daughters may not come back home because of how they are treated by the authority, how they're treated by the people who they say that they're going to protect and serve every one of us. These stories are real. These experiences are real. When is it going to hit? When is it going to hit everyone? Lead by example. People over profits.
Thank you. I want to take an opportunity to thank all the speakers. I know for some of you it's been very difficult what you had to say. I think all of the members of the board appreciate you taking the time to come here and share your experiences with us. Our next item on the agenda is the discussion and selection of new subcommittees. Members of the board have been provided 5 sample subcommittees that should be considered as we move forward to formulating our report. The subcommittees were divided in an area to ensure that all of the elements that we are required to report on are thoroughly vetted through, and that we solicit not only board member opinions, stakeholder opinions, very similar to the process we went through as we formulated the draft regulations. The subcommittees included members of the board. They included other members that had an interest in that particular subcommittee, and they were all open meetings with comments taken from all. Those comments were included ultimately in the final recommendations that we made. So I wanted to open it up. Can we close the doors? If you'd like to continue to participate in the board meeting, you can please step inside. Thank you. So at this point, the discussion centers around, actually, the first thing is identifying whether or not these five suggested committees are relevant. Any suggestions from the board regarding the committee structure, and then we'll move on next to making sure that the information included in each of the subcommittees is complete.
Chief?
Yes, Mr. Szilard.
Just a few observations or suggestions for staff, and particularly in light of, I think, what we heard from the public today. I think, and we have this HEAT model, but really there's only training is the only, I don't see the other. The H and the E and the A reflected here. So I think, and again, maybe we need to split this state and local racial and identity profiling policy subcommittee into 2. I leave that up to staff and the chairs to figure out what makes sense, because the purview of that one might become overwhelming. Because I do think, as I mentioned earlier, we need to have a focus on hiring, on screening, on recruitment, and on promotions. I think we need to explicitly call out de-escalation somewhere here, and that's not just about training. I think something that hasn't really come through in the sessions that I've heard so far is the critical importance of changing police culture, changing the culture within departments. And that's something where clearly those of you who have run departments have dedicated your time and your lives to, but I think it's a critical piece for the board to be looking at also. And then what kept coming up over and over again from the community comments is the word accountability, and I would add accountability and oversight. So if we could call out each of those elements, and again, wherever it makes sense to fit them in within the subcommittees, but to ensure that we're looking broadly. And then finally, besides the structure, I would just, having participated actively in 2 of the subcommittees that we had before, I understood that at the time we were in like a rapid pace to try to make recommendations on the very specific regulations that had to be issued. I hope that the way that the subcommittees operate going forward with these new subcommittees, and in fact with the full board, is really a lot more time for deep reflection and conversation, that it's not a regimented march through an approval process, and that we're really able to have, and even with the public comment, in fact, the people usually show up for the subcommittees are fewer, and while we have to be in compliance with whatever statutes there are in terms of meeting requirements and whatnot, that we're able to really dig in. These are tough issues, and they can't just be dealt with in a super paced, rapid manner. And I'm afraid that with the deadline looming so soon on the report, that we're going to be back into that same kind of process, And I just don't find that terribly useful. And if that's the case, staff could write a report and we could endorse it.
Yeah, Mr. Slide, your comments are right on point. I think there's two kind of layers to this. The first one is we are up against a pretty short time frame for this report. And unfortunately, I think much of what happened last time will occur. Hopefully, we can make some improvements. But moving forward to the second year's report, that's where I think we have more time to incorporate some more substantive information and expand that report. I think it's important for the board members to try to consider is what can we realistically accomplish, not try to do too much, but what we do in this report that's and really do in 5 months is the best work for the amount of time that we have.
If I could just add to that, I think that those are excellent points. Oh, is that on? That better? Is that we are going to be having annual reports. And so, one thing we could think about or discuss is that for each year within each of these topics, we might have a slightly different focus so that we can focus on a topic more deeply. I mean, that's one alternative.
So as I was thinking about this process, recently the Los Angeles County Civil Grand Jury issued its report. Each year the Civil Grand Jury focuses on certain aspects. It doesn't take everything. And I think that may be a model that we want to do is take 2 or 3 or 4 of the most critical issues. You mentioned accountability, de-escalation, changing culture, and make those some of the priorities of in addition to all the required things that we have to report on, but make them a priority of the report. And I just offer that up for consideration to the board.
I have a quick comment regarding, I was intrigued by the suggestion by the gentleman who indicated that doing our study somehow would displace studies by local communities. In other words, how would San Diego County know how their racial profiling is compared to other cities? And I don't know, how do we do that, and how do we incorporate more locally reports that would reflect the counties in which most people live, as opposed to a statewide survey, which might just be too broad to have relevance?
That's a good question. And how the data is to be reported is, yet to be determined unless somebody at the Department of Justice can provide more context to that. But I think that counties would be able to dive down into their county level data. Is that correct?
Right, and recall, is this on?
Yeah, okay.
On, sorry about that. Recall that once the data starts being collected and reported to the Department of Justice, the statute requires that it be disaggregated by department. So we're going to be able to have data by departments, and obviously departments correspond to different geographies and jurisdictions.
I would also, is
Let's just keep them all on.
I didn't do anything. I would also just encourage everyone to look at our Open Justice website, because that website includes a lot of the data analysis that we've done on our existing data sets and shows county comparisons, and you can actually compare law enforcement agencies to one another along a variety of different metrics. So it'll give you also, as far as like visually, what different types of analytics we can perform and what they might look like. That's also useful. So that is, as far as just kind of understanding what the data analysis could look like, that's a good piece. We won't have stop data yet, but we will be able to, I would like to start building out the infrastructure as far as how we will analyze the stop data once it does come in. And so that's one of the elements that you see listed in the stop data subcommittee requirements or suggestions, I guess it is really.
Andrea.
Mr. Chair.
I think Andrea.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Chief Farrow, if I may. Thank you to DOJ, thank you, Shannon, for giving us something to respond to in terms of subcommittees. I think, this first initial year is a good opportunity for us to, as you say, lay some of the groundwork and also get baseline data points or baseline information. So for example, around complaints, it would be great for the public to know what are the complaint processes across the police departments. What kind of forms are they using? What do they do when they get complaints? I mean, at the local level, that's something that could be really, really helpful, and it could also help us understand what best practices might be across police departments. So I really take to heart the comments about, making sure that we're not just checking in with police departments, but also checking in with the community. And I wonder if we couldn't conduct a baseline community survey to get a baseline understanding now before we embark on data collection this year about how the community feels about police. And I'm sure Professor Everhart and her colleagues could help construct something like that would be meaningful, that we could then use as a template to measure over time whether we are actually making a difference in the community on the ground, which is something we heard a lot about today. Something to consider that I think would be an important first step for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The public comment portion of today is very, very powerful, and it's very enlightening. And I know a lot of them have left, but I wanted to thank each and every public member who came here today for this important discussion. We hear you. And many of those comments centered around training. Training became a key component of a lot of the dialogue about how police officers are trained, how it's retained, what do they do with that training, and how often that training is done, and a lot of that. As I was looking at the way POST is developed in the commission, there are 15 members of that commission, 10 of which are law enforcement officers, 5 are at large, 2 are public members. And I was just thinking here as I was sitting here to push more transparency and more enlightenment so people truly understood how the commission works and how they do their training. If this committee right here may make a recommendation to the Attorney General in a report that perhaps someone from the RIPA board, not a member of the law enforcement, but a member of the RIPA board, be part of the commission. And so as that training is developed and it's looked at, somebody that is in constant communication with the voices that we heard here today can represent at the commission as new training is developed and outlined, there would be a voice. And I just throw that out for dialogue and discussion. I'm not sure how that would happen, but I know we do have a subcommittee on training, and maybe that would be something that we could wrestle with to make that recommendation to the Attorney General to push forward.
Good idea. Yes, Judge.
I think that's an excellent idea. I also think, although I'm going to say this, but I know it's not something we can do, and I don't know how it would be done, but I don't think you can really talk about training unless you talk about recruitment. For some time now, I have been of the opinion, an inexpert opinion, but an opinion nonetheless, that it may not be a good idea to hire the first person who walks through the door who doesn't have a criminal record and who doesn't have a mental, emotional, or developmental disorder. Because that's essentially what we do. That's how we just hire them. We wouldn't dream of letting someone go to medical school until they had 4 years of college. We wouldn't dream of letting them become doctors unless they had taken certain develop certain skills. Moreover, we give them the opportunity to become experts in a subset of medicine. For example, we have not only pediatricians, but pediatric cardiologists. And I don't know why we shouldn't start to think about that kind of recruitment and training for police officers, because if you look at what it is we expect them to do, I mean, we spend a lot of time bad-mouthing them, I know I do, but the fact of the matter is they have a difficult and occasionally dangerous job. I say occasionally because, you know, some employment is a lot more dangerous. Coal miners, for example, or the guys on oil rigs. But nonetheless, it can be a very dangerous job. It is extremely complicated. And although you don't hear them admitting it very much, I think very often they honestly don't know what to do, because human activity is so varied and so difficult, and they do have to deal with unconscious racism. We never want to talk about that, but let's face it, there is such a thing, and it makes it extremely difficult to deal with what we're talking about now. So we can't do anything about it now, but I really think we ought to accept the fact that you really can't talk about training without talking about recruitment.
I just want to build on that with a comment, particularly I think in being responsive to what the public and the community lifted up for us today. I think is incredibly important for us to continue to listen to. I know some of the things that I heard today, much different from our last few sessions, is how much people are depending on this board to play a significant role in moving this conversation forward. And so I also recognize that we are limited in our power, as Tim was mentioning earlier, with respect to us being an advisory board. But so I really want to strongly implore our colleagues at the Department of Justice that Attorney General Becerra be here at the next board meeting. I think it'd be incredibly important for him to sit here and listen to public comment from community members as well, to understand the seriousness of this matter. I think, just as Judge was lifting up, we do need a fundamental transformation of the public safety system, certainly here in California and also across this country. And we need to start having some different kinds of conversation that I know are outside the scope of what this board is tasked to do. But I'm just very concerned that if we are not responsive to what the community is saying, even with respect to what we're able to do from this platform, we're going to continue to create a narrative and an environment that doesn't create safety for anyone, both community members and law enforcement. So I just want to strongly implore, respectfully, my fellow board members as well, for us to really be thinking about, with these committees, how can we design them in such a way that, you know, if this board doesn't really have teeth, you know, let's get the sharpest gums that we can have, and then let's find a way to get the Attorney General to go with us to the dentist's office, and let's figure out how to find some implants.
So just, go ahead, sorry. Silence.
Did I turn it off again?
No, you're
Can you
good.
hear me? I just wanted to let you know that we spoke with the Attorney General, and he is so deeply committed and interested in this board. We will not set the next date unless it's a date that works for him, because he is so committed to the work of this board.
That's great. Okay, so I guess, yes.
One quick thing, and maybe this is more of a question for DOJ what to do, because piggybacking on what Ben was just saying, one of the comments that came up that concerned me was that, and I don't know what the facts are, but that folks had heard from the local chief here that she was going to stop doing the local study because now we had AB 953. I don't know any of the reality, but that concerns me, and I hope that there's a way to broadcast to law enforcement that I don't think we want anybody to stop doing local studies. They'll have to figure out what's duplicative and what isn't and what's most useful to them, but you know, we're not going to even see a shred of data until a year from now, let alone be able to begin to analyze it. We don't know what it'll look like. So I would hope that DOJ could sort of signal that at least we certainly don't want to discourage any departments from thinking they oughtn't continue to do important studies locally.
So part of the responsibility as the chair is to try to move some things along here, and I know that the time is getting close to our adjournment time, and I wanted to just kind of sort of encapsulate what I've heard from several of the board members. The first thing is we do need to move forward with some subcommittees, because we have a report that's due 5 months from now. I don't believe in any way, shape, or form everything that is required under these five subcommittees is exhaustive, and that will be the final product. So what I would like to do is see if there's at least a recommendation to move with these, with a couple caveats. A couple 3 words came up that I think are important. So, for example, the Stop Data Subcommittee, that's pretty straightforward relative to Stop Data. The Citizen Complaint Subcommittee, I think also is fairly straightforward, although I'm not saying everything that's listed is inclusive of what they're going to do. But then we talked about post-training subcommittee, and over again we heard recruitment. So maybe that subcommittee could be just be changed to the post-training subcommittee and recruitment, because post is highly engaged in recruitment. They have a major initiative now in recruitment, diversity, et cetera. So I think that subcommittee needs to have an expanded name, and also obviously the product that they're going to deliver should be included. Number 4 is pretty big. And what I would suggest is that we adopt this subcommittee, but also, accountability needs to be included somewhere in that title, and maybe reworded. But that subcommittee will have to meet, understand if they can address the scope, and then if they can't, make a recommendation back to the board of the Department of Justice to maybe split that off. And then the last one is evidence-based research and best practices. And I think that it's mentioned a couple times about how to change the police culture needs to be included as part of that discussion. So understanding that this is not an end-all, it is a two-part process. One, identifying the subcommittees. Subsequently, the subcommittees will identify their own chairs and co-chairs, as well as develop their scope of things that they're responsible for the report. So, in addition to, hint, hint, in addition to establishing these subcommittees, we're going to need volunteers to chair them and move that along, and then move the substantive issues under each subcommittee along, so that it addresses the board's needs as well as what we're hearing from the community.
If I could make a suggestion on Subcommittee 4, many of us smaller agencies are going to rely heavily on how larger agencies implement this moving forward. And perhaps on Subcommittee 4, we could really focus on the 9 or 10 agencies that we start with, which includes state and local law enforcement agencies and impact the most people in the state of California. Then that would narrow that scope just a little bit, but also allow a lot of agencies as they move forward to maybe use some of that data to develop their own, policies, procedures that may not exist today.
Sorry.
Just a suggestion.
Okay, thank you.
I caution against that only because coming from rural California, a lot of those departments aren't going to be represented. And we know some of the deepest problems with racial profiling exist in smaller departments in rural California and in the Central Valley. Kern County's police department and sheriff's department, I believe, are now currently under investigation for these sorts of issues. So if there's a way to also capture some of the smaller rural agencies, I think rural California would appreciate that too.
And I think that discussion could be happened at the subcommittee where you draw, the line on what you are actually going to look at. So is there a recommendation to number one, identify these 5 subcommittees with a couple? I think the post subcommittee, we wanted to add hiring or recruitment in there. On the number 4, accountability, and then number 5, adding culture as to some of the things to consider as a result of the subcommittee.
Yeah, I would make a motion that we adopt these committees with those changes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? The last thing is, there's a lot of work that went into the subcommittees. Really encourage the fellow board members to consider being a chair and leading that and driving whatever particular interest you find most appealing to you, and reaching out to the stakeholders that would provide the input that we need so that this report really means something and is useful. So just as a consideration, it's highly important to, now we identified subcommittees, but chairing one of them last year is a lot of work. Be committed to it, and a result, really listen, because we had a lot of stakeholder participation, and it really made, I think, the process that much easier and I think much more in-depth.
Chief Medrano, I have another motion that I'd like to explore.
Sure.
So most of the information that is highlighted in the subcommittee report outline here is information that exists, and it's a matter of deciding what to analyze, what to look at, and what to draw conclusions from. The one piece that I continue to think is important that we don't have is a community survey. I'm a little bit worried about the timeline that we have with the subcommittees and what it takes to schedule those subcommittees and with notice to the community, et cetera. I'm wondering if there's enough consensus on this board now around the value of a community survey to make a recommendation now to the Department of Justice that they pursue a community survey around effectiveness of policing and around police profiling. I don't know how that would be constructed, but some sort of baseline survey, if we could make that recommendation now, I would make a motion that we do recommend to the Department of Justice that they initiate a baseline community survey.
I mean, one thing I just want to, thinking that through. Oh, is it off again? I'm sorry. Is that better? Thinking that through, I'm wondering if that should be a survey. I think the idea of a survey is a great idea. If it should be a survey from this board through like a research institute or a university, perhaps. I wonder if that may be a better method for that type of survey than Department of Justice.
Well,
Something
my
to
interest
consider.
is, my interest, and this is coming from the community comment, is in making sure that we have some kind of a baseline survey that we can then measure the impact on the ground from the perspective of the community. And certainly, if the Department of Justice has the ability to partner with an academic institution to get it done, absolutely. I'm not sure what the how is, and I would leave that to staff to figure out, but that we do move forward with a survey that could be replicated down the line so we can track and measure impact. I mean, we heard very clearly that this board needs to demonstrate its relevance. And in this first year, when we are delayed in getting data, I think one of the ways that we can do that is to capture in a statistically significant way the perspective of the community so we can really know if we're making an impact going forward.
Just to nuance that, and the community that law enforcement has the most contact with. The internal law enforcement data says they spend 94 to 97% on 3 to 6% of the population, so it doesn't do us any good to survey the majority of people who actually aren't interacting with law enforcement on a regular basis.
Sure, I mean, we could look at hotspots
Right.
and do a sample there.
Would we want the survey to be developed, the survey questions by a subcommittee and working with Department of Justice and whoever else we partner with? mean, that
Ideally,
may
yes.
be.
I think if we could make a recommendation today that the Department of Justice move forward on it, then the Evidence-Based Research Committee, for example, could then weigh in on some of the how, but it would already be in motion. We wouldn't have to wait for the subcommittee to be convened to make the decision about moving forward before DOJ would begin to think about how it would be constructed, and then we could weigh in on that.
Okay, so that would fall under the jurisdiction of the subcommittee number 5. I just have one other recommendation, and I don't know how the board feels. I'd actually like to know what other studies are already out there that are relevant that we're not aware of. I mean, of course, Professor Everhart is not here. She probably has a lot of information, but I think as we do that, I'd also like to see what else has been done to help us formulate the best.
Absolutely, and I think what I heard her say and what I've heard others say is that that's the missing piece. We don't know what the impact is on the ground. We need some baseline information. So I would make the motion that we recommend to Department of Justice that they initiate a community-based survey and work with the Evidence-Based Research Subcommittee to develop it.
I second it.
So I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Is there one opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Okay.
This has been just some quick closing remarks. We're done with the formal agenda. Appreciate everyone who came out today from the public as well as the participation for the board members. And I just want to acknowledge all the hard work from the DOJ staff. I know that behind the scenes you're doing so much to get us prepared. So yeah, let's give them a round of applause. I am very happy. I have a co-chair now, and Reverend McBride will be we're working with DOJ to choose the next spot and location that is convenient for everyone. Do you have any? Do you have any closing comments?
I don't.
Thank Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.